Take your time, kiddo.
This episode is from Sesame Street, and the reason why it was taken down was because they decided to put the Wicked Witch of the West into this episode, which really scared children. And if you guys remember, I think I did a video on Sesame Street about a year and a half ago, and I did mention this episode. So this is kind of like deja vu for you, but we're gonna bring it up again. So the Wicked Witch of the West, if you guys didn't know, she is from The Wizard of Oz, and when that movie came out, she really did scare a lot of children. And what's so bizarre is that Sesame Street, they're supposed to be catering to like what, toddlers? Why would they put the Wicked Witch of the West in a show for toddlers? That just, are you dumb? That actually hurt my head. So this episode came out in 1976, and the actress Margaret Hamilton took on her role from the movie and was in Sesame Street. So I guess that's the original actress of the Wicked Witch of the West. I don't really know, I'm assuming so. So basically the premise of this banned episode is that the Wicked Witch of the West is driving. She's flying her broom over Sesame Street and accidentally drops it into Sesame Street. So the whole entire episode is her looking around Sesame Street for her broom. So she's like,
"Do you have it? Do you have it? Is it in there? Where's my broom?"
And she's all like freaked out looking for her broom. And she even threatens to turn Big Bird into a feather duster at one point. So I think kids were just really disturbed at the fact that she was walking around threatening their favorite characters from the show. Sesame Street received a flood of negative feedback from parents who said that their children were afraid and didn't want to watch the show anymore. And it says in quotations, "The threat of the witch's power remains in the children's eyes." What does that even mean? I don't even know. The episode was pulled from the airwaves and never aired again. What sucks about me doing this video is that because these episodes were pulled, I can't find a lot of footage or screenshots to show you. I may have like one or two screenshots from each pulled episode, because obviously when they pull an episode of a show, they don't want any evidence of it anywhere anymore. You know what I mean? But anyways, that was the Sesame Street episode that was just gone. The next one we're gonna talk about is Peppa Pig, which that's a kid's show that I didn't think would ever have a pulled episode, because aren't they like G-rated? Like, aren't they like the best kids show in the world? I don't even know, guys. Peppa Pig came out when I was like a teenager, so obviously I never watched it. Oh wait, 2004? Peppa Pig has been around that long? Why don't I remember this? I thought it came out when I was in high school, but it says that the episode they took down was an episode called Mr. Skinny Legs, which aired in 2004. Okay. It says sometimes a well-intended message can lead to frightful results, depending on where you live. So this one's a very interesting one, because this being aired anywhere in the world probably would have been fine, but when it was aired in Australia, that's when it was cancelled. So this episode that was named Mr. Skinny Legs was trying to teach kids that while spiders may look scary, they can't really hurt you. So the whole premise of this episode was supposed to be good. It was supposed to say, kids, spiders, you shouldn't be afraid of them. They're just small spiders. They're little creatures that won't harm you. At the beginning of the episode, Peppa is afraid of the spider, but by the end of the episode, she befriends the spider and invites him as a guest to her tea party. So at the very end, it's just showing kids like, hey, if you treat spiders nicely, they're not gonna hurt you, just leave them be. The episode's message was fine and dandy in Britain, but not so much in Australia, home to some of the most venomous spiders in the world, like the redback spider, whose bites are intensely painful and have historically been linked with deaths. So basically, Australian broadcasters considered the episode unsuitable to be aired there because you don't want to be teaching kids like, hey, that spider over there, go play with it. You know what I mean? Especially if there are a ton of venomous spiders in Australia. Probably not the best idea, and I do kind of understand why they chose to take this down, because you don't want to be a mom walking in on your kid like holding up a spider that has these big fang things coming out. Wait. They wouldn't be coming out of their eyes. Like, why am I putting them here? Like, fangs come out of here. Anyways, though, let's move on. The next episode that was taken down was one from Pokemon, and this episode, people call it the Pokemon flashing. That's not the original name of the episode, but that's just what people like, the Pokemon flashing, okay? This infamous Pokemon episode all started when Ash was forced to travel inside the depths of one of his own Pokeballs, which is a really cool concept. Like, don't you ever wonder what it looks like inside of a Pokeball? Because I have always wanted to see inside there. So in this episode, Ash apparently actually travels into his Pokeball. When Pikachu used lightning to detonate incoming missiles, he saved the day. But for kids watching the show, things didn't go so smoothly. The flashing red and blue explosion sent almost 700 Japanese children into bouts of dizziness, headaches, blurred vision, or in some cases, seizures. So this episode made headlines around the world and didn't just get the episode banned, but the entire show had to go on a 4-month break. This is insane to me. I don't remember ever hearing about this, but the fact that that many children were rushed to hospital is insane. Like, how intense was the flashing? Like, it must have been like, how do you make that many children ill? That is insane to me. Anyways, though, let's move on. If you guys remember that happening and that whole controversy, please let me know, because that's not in my memory at all. Okay, the next show that had a banned episode was Dexter's Laboratory, and this episode specifically was called Rude Removal. So this one actually says the episode was produced, but it was never aired. So I probably can't find any picture of this because it was only produced and it wasn't allowed to be put on TV. It says in the episode, Dexter builds a machine known as the Rude Removal System, a machine capable of removing the rudeness from his sister Dee Dee. Oh man, that sounds funny though. But then Dee Dee interferes and both siblings get caught in the machine. The Rude Removal System splits the two up into a sweet and polite pair and then a very rude pair. The rude pair are destructive and they swear like sailors. The vulgar language is bleeped out, but the context makes it very easy for viewers to know exactly what they're saying. So Cartoon Network banned the episode from ever airing. Oh my gosh, but sometimes it's shown at animation festivals. So occasionally this episode is shown at like big events and stuff, but it was never shown on TV because of the swearing. So even though it was beeped out, I guess parents of kids watching this show like wouldn't have wanted that. I don't know, that's interesting. Okay, we have two more. The next show that had a banned episode, I'm honestly not very surprised about. It's the Ren and Stimpy show, and it's the episode called Man's Best Friend. I always found this show to be very, very weird anyway. This show was already controversial for its dark humor, adult jokes, and violence, among other things. Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't ever think this show was meant for like little kids because of its humor. It says one episode in particular may have gone over the top, at least according to Nickelodeon. Things in the episode called Man's Best Friends were going pretty smoothly until an unusually violent scene that consisted of Ren beating up one of the pair's new owners with an oar, like an oar from a boat. The episode never aired due to Nickelodeon pulling the plug on it. That is so bizarre. So the episode was going totally fine, and then randomly Ren decides to take an oar from a boat and just start smacking this person with it. Like, that is some violent stuff right there. And the last one we're gonna talk about is an episode from Betty Boop, and it was called Laughter is Contagious. So I don't know about you guys, but I grew up watching Betty Boop, and I know Betty Boop aired like, oh my gosh, when was it even? 40s, 50s, 60s? A long time ago. Maybe even before then, like 30s? I'm gonna have to look up like when Betty Boop first came out, but when I was a kid, we had like VHS movies of all of the Betty Boop episodes, so I watched those all the time with my sister, and like looking back, there were a lot of episodes that were interesting to say the least. If you've seen Betty Boop, you know what I mean. It's not really meant for little kids. So let's talk about this episode. Betty discovers that her creepy clown friend named Coco has a bad toothache. Instead of taking Coco to a certified dentist, Betty decides that she is better suited for the job. So she doesn't take him to an actual dentist. She's like, no, I'm gonna deal with your tooth, okay? In a scene like something you would see in a horror movie, Betty takes some pliers and continuously yanks on Coco's tooth with zero success. So she's trying to pull out his tooth with pliers. With Coco writhing in pain, Betty decides that laughing gas would be the best medicine for him. Because as you guys know, if you go to like get teeth taken out, they usually give you laughing gas. But she ends up using too much, which causes the gas to spill out into an entire town, causing people and even inanimate objects to laugh uncontrollably. The cartoon was banned because too much laughing gas was apparently just not a good thing to be showing to children, so that was pulled. Blue's Clues is an animated children's television series that first aired on September 8th, 1996. The show follows the adventures of Blue, who is a blue-spotted puppy, and she has an owner named Steve, who is also a main role. Okay, I have to admit something. I had no idea that Blue was a girl. I don't know why my whole life I thought it was a boy. Not that it even matters really, but like, it just... I just dropped my phone. My phone's even shook. Now, this show was so interesting to people because the entire thing was animated except for Steve, who was the host of the show. He was obviously played by a real human, but like everything in the show moved and the furniture spoke and had eyes. It was just an intriguing concept for the time. I mean, I remember I used to watch this show religiously. Religiously? I can speak today. I loved this show as a kid. I watched it all the time whenever it was on. I knew all the songs. I knew everything. And because I loved it so much, I have to admit that doing research about this show kind of ruined my childhood. So now I know how you guys feel about my videos. But yeah, comment down below if you used to watch this show as well. I know it came out in the 90s, but I think they did a reboot like a few years ago. I don't know, I don't really keep up with this stuff. So let's talk about some lost episodes of Blue's Clues. Now, there are quite a few about this show, but a lot of them I can't even mention because they are so messed up. But there is one that a lot of people remember called Steve's Notebook. If you've ever watched the show, you notice that Steve is always holding his notebook with him. He uses it to draw all the clues when he goes on his adventures with Blue. And every episode, Steve is always so outgoing and happy and talkative and he's singing. People always know him as this crazy hyper dude that has a dog. But there was one episode that people remember where the episode starts and Steve walks on the screen looking very, very tired. He has these dark circles under his eyes. His movements are very slow, almost like he's functioning in slow motion. His eyes look bloodshot and he walks up to the camera and says,
Hi everyone.
just in a completely unenthusiastic tone. As the episode went on, the way he was drawing in his notebook wasn't right. It was almost like he was just scribbling on it instead of drawing an actual object. All of his shapes were distorted. Something was not right about Steve, which people found really weird because if you look at the show, he always draws really well. So near the end of this episode, the creepiest thing happened. The screen got darker and you can see through the windows of the house that it almost looked like it was about to start storming. And Steve began writing something in his notebook that people couldn't see at first. But then he turned it around and held it up to the camera and it said, "Help me." And you could see this pleading look in his bloodshot eyes like you knew he meant it. And then the episode suddenly ended. And people began speculating that maybe Steve was being held against his will. Like he had been kidnapped and was forced to make episodes every single day to make this show be popular and so it would make a lot of money. And maybe he was filming all day, every day, so he could barely rest and that's why he looks so horribly sick. Now, of course, this is a creepypasta, but it's definitely very eerie to read. As far as I know, this wasn't a real episode, but if you've seen this episode, please comment down below. And then there's the hallucinations theory. There's this other theory that everything Steve is experiencing in the show is a hallucination because he's slowly going insane. And that's why he sees talking objects, that's why he sings songs all day. He's literally living in a house by himself going mad. And Blue doesn't actually exist, none of his friends actually exist. It's a very dark theory. Now, speaking of Steve, there was an actual conspiracy theory that he died. The real actor who played the character Steve in the show was named Steve Burns. So he actually had the same name in real life as his character did in the show. He did the show for 7 years and then one day he was suddenly replaced by someone else, which really upset people because people loved Steve being the host. So when he was replaced, people were really sad and didn't really understand why. There was no explanation. It was like he was there one day and gone the next, and for 15 years after the show, no one heard from him. He wasn't in the news, no one ever saw him, so people speculated that he actually died. And the producers of the show didn't want to tell anyone because they didn't want it to ruin their ratings. I mean, if people heard he passed away, maybe they would stop watching the show. So they tried to inconspicuously replace him, hoping that kids wouldn't really tell the difference. And trust me, speaking from someone who saw the show, we could tell the difference. We knew it wasn't Steve. And there was even this lost episode rumor called New Steve, where this new host named Joe came onto the show and Blue knew it wasn't Steve. So Blue asked, "Where's the real Steve?" And Joe looked at the camera and said,
"Steve is gone now, and he's never coming back."
And this was insinuating that this Joe got rid of Steve so he could be the new popular guy on the show. Now, once again, this was all just a rumor made up to scare people because in 2017, Steve Burns finally came forward and said, yes, he is still alive. He actually admitted that the reason why he quit Blue's Clues was because he was balding. He was starting to go bald. And he says he didn't want kids to start watching him lose hair as the show went on. So he decided to quit before all his hair was gone off his head, which I feel like is a reasonable reason to leave. But also, like, honestly, Steve, I would have watched you even if you were bald. Alright, so we have 2 more shows to talk about. And these lost episode descriptions are a little bit shorter than the Blue's Clues ones, so these are gonna go by pretty fast. But the next show is called Peppa Pig, which I know you guys know about. I've actually talked about a banned Peppa Pig episode in a previous video, but I don't think I've ever talked about a lost episode. There are so many on the internet, so many, and like the Blue's Clues ones, some are too graphic to talk about on this channel, so we're gonna talk about the ones that are less crazy. So first we have one called Burning House. There was one where the episode started and the title came up saying, "Why?" And the whole episode is Peppa and her family dancing around the living room while their house burns down. So literally they're dancing, having a good time, and the walls are on fire, the carpet's on fire, everything around them is burning. And they don't seem to care, which is super weird. And there's a lot of versions where it goes into a lot more detail, talking about how they all like pass away in this house dancing and burning on fire. But yeah, people who claim to have seen this lost episode said it was very upsetting to see. And the next one is called Backwards. There's another lost episode where everything seems normal until Peppa comes on the screen and her head is literally twisted all the way around and is facing backwards on her body. And her parents walk up to her and they're like, "Oh, Peppa, something is different about you today. What is it?" And they're looking at her and they can't figure it out, even though it's so obvious that her head is backwards. And then she's like,
"Mommy, Daddy, it's opposite day at school today."
What the heck? And then at the end of the episode, her head falls off because it had been twisted too much. Ugh. So that would definitely be a very creepy episode to see, and I'm so glad these 2 episodes are not actually real. Thank goodness. Watch when you guys are like, "No, I've actually seen that episode, Jess." Okay, and the last show we're gonna talk about is Bear and the Big Blue House, which I know I've also mentioned on this channel before. But this lost episode is called Luna in capital letters. Now, Bear and the Big Blue House was a very popular show back when I was growing up. And if you used to watch it, you know there was a character called Luna the Moon. Well, the creepypasta says that Luna puts on a friendly face, but deep inside she is soulless and bloodthirsty. So this creepypasta is saying she's actually evil very deep down inside, and she's trying to hide that from everybody. The story goes that this man was working at Walt Disney World in Florida as a janitor, and as he was cleaning the inside of a soundstage, he found this tape that said Luna on it, and he knew it was from Bear in the Big Blue House. But when he turned over the tape, he saw that it also said Luna 666, which is never a good time. Those 3 6s all together mean evil. That was written in red ink, so he knew something was off, and he decided to play the tape for himself. When he played the episode, he noticed it was a lot darker than usual and almost had this red tint to it. It showed this big house, but there was no characters walking around inside of it. 7 minutes went by of the camera just going through all the rooms of the house, but no one was there. And all you can hear in the background was this weird audio of a crunching sound. Through these whole 7 minutes, you just heard someone crunching on something like they were eating. The camera pans towards the sky where you see Luna opening and closing her mouth as though she had just eaten something. And then by the end of the episode, you realize that she has consumed all the characters and her friends in the house. She ate everybody. So this Disney worker was so freaked out to watch this, immediately told all the staff, they reported it. And yeah, I don't think this ever aired on television. And obviously it's just a creepypasta, but yeah, that's pretty scary. I used to love this show and I thought Luna was the best character ever, just personally. Thomas the Tank Engine is an anthropomorphic fictional steam locomotive. So in other words, it's a train with a human-looking face. Originally, he was a character in a railway book series, so he only existed in illustrations before it became a TV show. And this is the exact way he was described in the book. It says he was a tank engine who lived at a big station. He had 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler, and a short stumpy dome. And he was very cheeky too. Now I actually remember my grandmother reading me this book before bedtime as a little kid, and I always thought that this whole idea of a tank engine with like a creepy face was weird. Like, I know people love this character, he's like a classic character in history, but guys, it's literally a train with a human face. Does no one see anything wrong with it? It wasn't until October 1984 that Thomas and Friends became a show, and it only got more and more popular after that. So this lost episode creepypasta is called Thomas.avi. It was about this guy who was babysitting these 2 little kids for his friend. He wanted to put on a movie for them to watch, so he walked over to their DVD shelf and picked one of the Thomas the Train movies. But the second he showed these girls this DVD, they had this terrified look on their face. One of the girls literally said,
If we watch that, he will come and find us.
and obviously the babysitter had no idea what they meant by that, so he kind of just shrugged it off and put on a different movie. But that whole evening, he couldn't help but think, what the heck? Who would come and find them? So that night he went home and put the Thomas the Train DVD into his PlayStation 3 so he could find out what they were so afraid of. Now when this DVD loaded, he instantly knew something wasn't right. The opening scene was all glitchy, there were no credits at all, the music was playing backwards, which is terrifying, and every time the movie cut to a different scene, there was like static all over the screen for a few seconds. All of the engines at the station looked extremely sad and depressed. They all just seemed so unmotivated to move or do anything. James the red engine started crying as he looked directly at the camera, and he said right to the camera, "Please don't make me do it." And then one of the other trains piped in and said, "We have no choice." And they all forcefully started to act out the episode against their will. Apparently it was a very eerie thing to watch, especially because the show was supposed to be super uplifting and happy, but all of these engines look so sad and like they didn't even want to be in this movie. James headed out onto the tracks, and soon he reached a dark tunnel. And as he slowly approached it, everything went black. And after that, nothing happened. It was just completely black for the next 5 minutes until the normal credits appeared and then the DVD ended. So he ejected the disc. He was so confused as to what he just saw, but right before he put it back into the DVD case, he realized that written on the DVD said, "You stole my life." That night, he had dreams about going into that dark tunnel that James went down. And the next morning, when he was getting ready for school, he noticed that all the pages in his English book were ripped out. Only one page remained in his book, and it had a huge letter T written on it, I assume for Thomas the Train. So that night, when he got home, he decided to watch the movie again, hoping to get more answers. Even though it was supposed to be the same movie, it almost seemed different every time that he watched it. This time it continued after James went into the tunnel. Everything went black, but this time he heard voices of Thomas the Train and James. He heard Thomas's voice say, "You stole my life, I steal it back." And then James screamed and the DVD ended. Then he suddenly got a phone call, and thinking it was his mom, he answered it. When he said hello, he heard a voice on the other end that sounded just like Thomas the Train, and it said, "I know you're listening, Kenny Pay," and that was his name. So he dropped his phone, he grabbed the DVD, ran outside, and threw it in the trash in front of his house. The garbage truck then came the next day, and he never saw the DVD again. So a bunch of people have sort of different theories about this lost episode of Thomas the Train. To me, it sounds like the creepypasta is trying to say that every time you watch Thomas the Train, you're like forcing the trains to entertain you. It's like they're really inside the DVD world and they're like slaves to kids. So all they want to do is relax and do nothing, and when you press play, they have to like act out the episode, and that's why they're so depressed. It's kind of like Steve in Blue's Clues, the whole theory about him being forced to do the show. But obviously something weird is happening in that dark tunnel. I'm not really sure what, but it sounds like something terrifying happens in there. But oh my gosh, imagine being haunted by Thomas the Train. Try explaining that to your parents.
It's like, "Oh honey, why are you crying?"
Mommy would never understand. It's a train with a face.
Now there have been so many creepy memes about Thomas the Train. You've probably seen a bunch of these. I remember there were these specific animations and GIFs going around the internet showing that Thomas the Train is actually this long creepy creature that can crawl out of the train. I also saw this other one created by, I believe, Tom Coben, showing Thomas the Train as this horrifying spider thing. I will literally have nightmares forever about this. Like, imagine he's a train by day and a creepy spider thing by night. No thank you. Alright, the first show I'm gonna mention is called Don't Look Under the Bed, and this show aired in 1999. So I was how old? I was 5 years old. Don't Look Under the Bed is considered Disney's most terrifying original movie. In fact, it was so scary that Disney Channel had to stop airing it at the request of unhappy parents. Now, I thought this was a TV show, but I guess it was a movie, but it was played on a TV channel. It's about this girl named Frances who has this imaginary friend named Larry. And what's creepy about this movie is that Larry starts slowly turning into the boogeyman. He grows long fingernails, has glowing purple eyes, and sharp pointy rows of teeth. He even pulls her brother under the bed at one point. And what's even worse is that her imaginary friend boogeyman is not even the most terrifying part of the movie. She also has these porcelain dolls in her room that move on their own when no one is watching. So there's a lot going on in this girl's life. But so many kids were complaining about having nightmares that they literally had to take this show down from the Disney Channel ASAP. The next one we're gonna talk about actually was a TV show. It was called Whizbit. This show actually aired in the 80s. So the main character of this show is named Whizbit, and he is supposed to be a magician's hat. The shape alone is enough to give us nightmares, but the way it moves and operates is extra spine chilling. People say the weirdest part about this show show is that this Whizbit magician's hat has a very high-pitched, strange voice, and he is always accompanied by this man in a rabbit suit that always dances for a very uncomfortable amount of time. So it's like wherever Whizbit goes, this creepy rabbit suit man follows. And what's weirder is that Whizbit lives in a house that is completely black and white. It's just void of color. I don't know, the show just gives off this very strange vibe and people weren't feeling it. Next, we're gonna talk about Mummin Chans. I hope I'm saying that right. Mummin Chans? Why is this so hard for me? Mummin Chans is a theater group who performs using a series of masks and props. Now, this show was not originally intended to be for children, but they did appear on shows made for children's, like The Muppets, for example. They had a whole episode dedicated to them. And to be honest, this group is really talented. Like, what they do is pretty cool, but the kids who were watching them were scared because they always wore these very eerie masks. So parents thought it was strange that they would put this group onto kids' TV channels, because when you're young, seeing someone's face being covered by something scary is never fun. That's why a lot of kids are actually afraid of clowns. The next show we're gonna talk about is called Carbuncle. This is a pretty creepy character that comes from a Norwegian TV series. This series is called I Meek Lorland. I hope I'm saying that right. The story revolves around this character named Meek, who lives in a world where every single person is obsessed with reading and writing. Everyone except for the character named Carbuncle. Carbuncle sets out to terrorize anyone that is trying to read or write. This character is meant to be a little off-putting and seems to be more terrifying than funny. Just like the other TV shows we mentioned, there were a lot of complaints that this character was just too scary for kids. Why is someone riding a motorcycle in the middle of winter? So because they got so many complaints from parents, they actually tried to redesign his character to make him look more friendly, but that didn't end up working. He actually looked scarier afterwards. So the show had to actually be canceled in the late 90s. I feel like that's such a weird premise for a show though, like trying to stop people from reading and writing. The next show is called Ubi, and this show is super bizarre. This actually aired in the early 2000s, and I cannot believe that I don't remember this. Please comment down below if you remember any of these shows. The idea for this show is simple but weird. Instead of puppets, it's just the hands talking with ping pong balls for the eyes. But there's something very unsettling about the whole thing. And the way these characters talk are really disturbing as well. I love how I'm making an example of a hand. It's also disturbing the way the hands move and float around the set as if they were detached. Them being puppets without actually being puppets is almost as if we're watching the skeleton of the puppets perform. So most people that have seen this show agree that it's just too weird to watch and take seriously, and a lot of kids would beg their parents to change the channel on the television. Next, let's move on to a character named Limbo that was actually from The Muppets. Limbo is a Muppet character who is arguably the most terrifying of them all. Limbo doesn't look like most puppets do. I mean, I just did a whole video on the Muppets. You know how they look. Limbo is a whole other thing. He was the most abstract of them all, mostly appearing as just a mouth and two eyes made out of string. So Limbo was just a face made out of string, and a lot of kids found this disturbing. And whenever the character was on the screen, it was accompanied by this very ominous music, and I think I remember this character, and I don't think I liked it very much. And the last show we're gonna talk about is called Peppermint Park. This was meant to be an educational kids show, but it turned out not being so successful. The way these puppets were designed were just too terrifying. The puppets even look as though they could be humans wearing costumes. Their faces are similar to dolls, and the bodies are long and move in a frightening manner. And what's even weirder is it's so hard to come across footage and photos of this show. It was almost like it never really existed at all. Not a lot of people remember watching it. It's just one of those shows that seemed like a far-off dream. I just think it's so weird that they decided to design the puppets that way. The first first show is called Mullygrubs. This was an Australian television series for preschoolers, and it aired in the 80s and ended in the mid-90s. The show was best remembered for the face made up of just eyes, eyebrows, nostrils, and a mouth on a blue screen that appeared occasionally during the program. And let me just tell you, so many adults remember this particular character because she terrified them as kids. And I don't blame them. Imagine this blue face suddenly appearing on your screen when you're 5 years old. Now, the weirdest thing about all of this is that this show wanted this actress to remain anonymous. They wanted the person who played her to be mysterious so that no one ever knew. And that freaked out people more because they wanted to see the real face behind this character. So decades went by with people not knowing who she was, and just recently she came out to the public and she was like,
It's me.
Alright, the next TV show is called Pob's Program. This is also another kids television series that came out in the United Kingdom in 1985. The program is presented by a puppet named Pob who speaks Welsh and who supposedly lives inside the viewer's TV. It says he's supposed to be this goblin baby who wears a pink and yellow stripy jumper. But the thing is, kids were afraid that he actually lived inside their TV all the time. Imagine being afraid of your television as a kid because you're afraid this guy is just gonna jump out at you when you least expect it. Like you're sitting eating breakfast and the TV is off and suddenly he's like, hey! Alright, this next show is called Grisly Tales for Gruesome Kids. What a strange title. This started off as a series of award-winning children's books by British author Jamie Ricks, which were later adapted into an animated television series. Each book in the franchise contains several cautionary tales about children of many ages and the consequences of their antisocial actions. And because of this strange concept, kids found this to be terrifying. There was this one character in particular named Uncle Grizzly. He is the owner of Squeam Screen Cinema, and he appears at the beginning and end of every episode in the first 6 series. He's the only person who works there and mans the front doors and ticket booth. Now, Uncle Grizzly has this pet spider named Spindleshanks, and he is so cruel to his pet spider. He often injures the poor creature as part of the introduction to that week's tale. And in many episodes, he turns his head into something scary to scare his pet spider. For example, his head turned into a fly in the episode called Death by Chocolate. Why does this character kind of remind me of Beetlejuice? I don't know why. Because like Beetlejuice turns into weird things and like changes his head. You know what I mean? Alright, the next show is called The Spooks of Bottle Bay. This is a children's drama series that came out in the early 90s. And all of the characters in the show are these creepy puppets. The show follows the adventures of Sydney Sludge and his dog Maxwell and the townfolk of Bottle Bay. The town was in fact located in a bottle on the mantelpiece of an unknown person's house. And all of these characters have really weird names. I'll read some of them. Damask the Highwayman, Brenda Drain, Duchess of Dingledale, Sally Spook, Melanie Sludge. It's a little strange. But the way a lot of these characters were designed, people were afraid. Next we have the characters called Zig and Zag. And this was from a show called The Big Breakfast. The Big Breakfast was a British television show that aired in the 90s. The show was a mix of news, weather, interviews, audience phone-ins, and songs. Zig and Zag are an Irish puppet duo. They are said to be a pair of furry extraterrestrial twins from the planet Zog. And I think just the bizarre way they looked and acted really freaked kids out. I mean, I don't think I ever would have been a fan of creepy puppet twins, but that's just me. Next we have a character named Zippy, and he's from the show called Rainbow. Rainbow was a kids television show that aired in the 70s, so this is probably one of the oldest ones we're gonna be talking about. It was intended to develop language and social skills for preschool children, and they actually made it to be very similar to Sesame Street. Each episode of Rainbow revolved around a particular activity or situation that arose in the Rainbow house where the main characters lived. Zippy is a light orange monster with a rugby ball shaped oval head, blue eyes, and a zip for a mouth, hence his name. Now, this character is very stubborn. He always claims to be right. He loves to eat sweets and play his favorite songs. He tells jokes, and he likes to be the center of attention. But the amount of adults that are saying this character used to give them nightmares as kids is insane. I mean, why would they decide to give this character a zipper for a mouth? That's so weird. All right, next we have a show called Wizadora. This was a children's television show that aired in the 90s. Wizadora was designed to help prepare kids for school. The title character was a trainee wizard who was always trying to solve problems using magic. Now here's the thing, many of the objects in this person's house were alive. They could talk. For example, here are some of the characters they were. There was one named Hangle, who was a purple coat hanger with a yellow raincoat, glasses, a mustache, and a crude sense of humor. Then we've got Top, Sticky, and Bottom, who were three mischievous and perpetually hungry sock-like creatures. Then we have Filbert, who was a squeaking vegetable who loved to water the plants, but the character that scared kids the most was Phoebe, a talking telephone who answered calls, took messages, and spoke many different languages. And I mean, yeah, look at her face. It's very strange. All right, next we have the show called Real Monsters, and there was a character named the Gromble. Now, this was an American television series that came out in the 90s. The show focuses on three young monsters, Ickis, Oblina, and Crumb, who attend a school for monsters under a city dump and learn to frighten humans. This kind of sounds like Monsters Inc. or something. No, I used to watch this show as a kid, and every time I was creeped out. Every time. So there's this character who is a headmaster, and he's known as Gromble. He has been seen eating students and then spitting them out after chewing on them for a bit. He's strict, he's violent, and he's usually super violent with his students to teach them to be better monsters. But like a lot of things he would do, I can't believe it was even allowed in a kid's television series. Like, this show got intense at a lot of times. Okay guys, we have two more. This next one is called Tweety Hyde, and this was revolving around the Looney Tunes show. So the Looney Tunes show came out in the 60s, and they were airing episodes all the way up into the 2000s. There was this one episode called Hide and Go Tweet that parents complained about because it was scaring their kids. This particular episode took a little twist on the classic story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It starts off with Sylvester the cat chasing Tweety Bird around trying to eat him as he usually does, and Tweety escapes into the laboratory and jumps into the Hyde formula bottle. He then becomes this giant laughing monster who tried to eat Sylvester numerous times. While this may be considered ironic considering how often Sylvester tried to eat Tweety, this imagery is disturbing to say the least. The whole episode, Tweety frequently switches between his usual innocent self and the evil bird monster. They were airing this particular episode a lot in the 90s, so I saw it a lot as a kid, and I didn't like it. All right, and lastly, we have a show called Jigsaw. Jigsaw was a British television series that came out in the 70s, and it was aimed to kids ages 4 to 7. The show was meant to combine elements of puzzle solving and entertainment. There was this one character named Mr. Nosybonk that terrified people. He wore a dinner suit and a hideous white mask. Episodes would often see him giving clues via a mimed sketch, and he was super silent, which added to the terror. It was just strange to have this really scary character in the show because it was a children's learning show. Like, why make him so scary? Although Mr. Nosybonk was silent, he was always accompanied by a hauntingly repetitive theme tune. And now Mr. Nosybonk has indeed returned in a series of short internet horror sketches. So people have actually turned this character into like a creepypasta and different scary things on the internet nowadays. I can't believe this was for a kid's show. First show is called Liftoff. This was an Australian children's television show that came out in 1992. Each episode featured a live-action storyline about a group of young children and the problems they encountered with growing up. But there was this one doll on the show that absolutely terrified people, especially adults now that look back on the show. The doll was named EC, and it was this notorious, faceless, genderless doll that was supposed to represent every child. So basically, this was supposed to be like a blank canvas doll that could be whatever you wanted it to be. So EC was kind of like a representation of every kid's imagination. And I actually think it's a really cute idea, but why did they have to make it so scary? And they actually even sold these dolls in stores. Imagine just having this faceless doll sitting in your room. I actually see a lot of people selling these dolls on eBay for a lot of money. I don't want it. but I kind of want it. All right, this next show is called Telechat. This was a French-Belgian puppet show that came out in the early 1980s. It was basically supposed to be this parody of news shows. It was hosted by two funny animals, a tomcat named Groucha and an ostrich named Lola. It also featured a variety of random sentient objects. So they would basically have like humanoid objects on the show as well that freaked people out. Many adults agree that this show gave them nightmares as kids. And I can definitely see how it would. I mean, it's really bizarre. This next show, I know I'm gonna butcher the name, I'm so sorry. Slineko? I'm sorry. This was a children's TV show that ran in Slovakia in the late 70s and early 80s. The most famous character on the show is Radifak Plancha. He was a 7-foot puppet operated by two people under a blanket. Apparently his name translates to big nose blanket. He was intentionally designed to be as disturbing as possible. This is literally a quote from the designer of the puppet. It says, "He is an eyesore. He's ugly. I think the TV station was avant-garde in a way because they were not afraid to show an unlikable and not pretty puppet on the screen. So they intentionally made him look kind of disturbing." Plachta has many unusual features such as a big nose, buck teeth, and thinning blonde hair. He also has an abnormally long neck. His voice is not too pleasant. His personality is apparently like very clumsy. He always gives children misinformation and then the children would have to like correct him with the right information. There were also a few other puppets on the show such as a sunny talking hand puppet. Like when I was doing research for this video, this show was like at the top of the list for the most scariest shows. All right, next we have the Pingu Walrus. Pingu was a claymation television series that came out in the 90s. My sister and I actually used to watch this show all the time. It was kind of boring, but like we still watched it. It centers on a family of anthropomorphic penguins who live at the South Pole, and the main character is the family's son and title character Pingu. But there's just this one character on the show that still scares people to this day, and that is the walrus. The giant walrus is a mysterious character who only appeared in the episode Pingu's Dream. He was first seen following Pingu and eventually he frightened and caught him. The walrus squeezed and stretched Pingu a few times while laughing, causing Pingu to run away. The walrus then ate the mattress of his bed, and like Pingu was trying to escape this thing. They made this walrus so scary. I don't understand why. I remember watching this episode being like, no. Okay, this next show, I'm gonna butcher the name as well. It's called Asi Morso Yamoro? This was a kid's show that came out in Finland in the 90s. I think it was only airing for like a year or so. It is known for having really disturbing puppets for a children's show. The show revolves around a donkey named AZ, a cat named Moro, and a mouse named Morso. Even the show's director stated that Morso's nightmarish appearance was completely intentional. It's so weird how like people are coming out and being like, yeah, we tried to make him scary for kids. Like, why did people do that? Next we have the Wiggles Puppets. Now the Wiggles is a children's band from Australia, and they basically sing and dance and perform for their friends. It came out in the early 2000s, and I remember always watching an episode of this show before I went to school. So like while I was eating my breakfast, waiting for the bus, this show would be on. It's actually embarrassing how many songs I know. The Wiggles Puppets are puppets modeled after the Wiggle characters. They have a high-pitched voice, kind of like Alvin and the Chipmunks. And due to how they look, sing, and move their bodies, many kids and even adults have found them scary, resulting in a lot of negative feedback. So people were calling into the show, writing to the show, angry parents saying, please stop showing these scary puppets. It says, in response to the feedback they were getting, it was stated that the Wiggles like to try new things, but sincerely apologized for scaring everybody. And like, yeah, why were these puppets necessary? Next we have a show called HR Pufnstuf. Mayor HR Pufnstuf and the other residents of Living Island who are trying to escape the evil clutches of Witchy Poo, who is a witch who wants to steal Jimmy's talking flute for her collection of magical objects. So Freddy is the name of this talking flute, and people say the way he was designed is just super creepy. He's apparently the only golden magical talking flute in the world who belongs to the young English boy Jimmy. Witchy Poo desires to melt down Freddy and turn him into a pair of magical singing earrings. And yeah, I think the pictures of this flute just speak for themselves. I don't know why so many kids TV shows give like inanimate objects faces. Stop doing that. Next we have a show called Worzel Gummidge. This apparently was a children's fantasy TV series that came out in the 70s. In the series, Worzel Gummidge was a scarecrow that could come to life. Living in 10-acre field, he would often visit the nearby village of Scatterbrook. He befriended two children, brother and sister John and Sue Peters, who often tried to clear up the messes that he creates. But people say his character just looked like this creepy, like dirty old man. And in a lot of the scenes of this show, it just had a lot of dark undertones. Like there's this grim scene where Worzel is having a nightmare where his scarecrow body is being hacked to bits by some scary woman. Like why would they put that scene into a kids movie? Alright, and lastly we have a show called Moomin. Moomin is a Japanese, Finnish, Dutch anime television series based on the Moomin novels and comic strips by the Finnish illustrator and author Tove Jansson and her brother Lars Jansson. Moomin takes place in the peaceful Moomin Valley, where a young Moomin, along with his parents Moomin Papa and Moomin Mama, live in the large and blue Moomin house. Ugh. Say that 5 times fast. Now, there's this one particular character called the Groke that everyone used to be afraid of, apparently. The Groke is a fictional character in the Moomin world. Wherever she stands, the ground below her freezes and plants and grass die. She leaves a trail of ice and snow when she walks on the ground. So basically, anything she touches will freeze. She just seeks friendship and warmth, but she's declined by anyone she goes near, leaving her to live in her cold cavern on top of the lonely mountains. The Groke is both a live representation of loneliness and a psychological depiction of very lonely people who have a hard time accepting and expressing love in the right way, making them seem cold and scary to others. Which is honestly so sad when you really look into this character's backstory. They just want to be loved, they don't want to be lonely, but everyone's afraid of her. This is probably because her face is always twisted into an unsettling grimace. She has 2 cold staring eyes, a big nose, and a wide mouth, and her lower body is essentially this like curtain, obscuring her from the waist down. It almost makes her look ghostly. But despite this, she actually does have legs and she does leave footprints behind. Anyway, people did find this character scary, but if you really look into it, she just wants love. The first show I'm going to be talking about is Rugrats, and there was an episode called Angelica's Worst Nightmare. Now, if you didn't know, Rugrats visualizes ordinary, everyday activities through the eyes of a group of toddlers. I used to love this show as a kid, but I do remember there being a lot of scary episodes. I have no idea why. But like I said, there was this episode that came out called Angelica's Worst Nightmare, and it's where Angelica, who is an only child, she's super spoiled, her parents tell her that they're going to be having another baby. And she's not very happy about this news because she realizes that she will no longer be the center of their attention. Her parents start ignoring her while they're discussing the pregnancy, and Angelica begins to worry that they won't have time for her anymore. So she goes to her mother and asks her not to have the baby. Her mother laughs it off and she just storms up to her bed and goes to sleep. In a nightmare that she has, Angelica's baby brother has arrived and her parents have forgotten who she is. So she's sent to live in the laundry room and eat table scraps while her brother is given her room and all of her toys. Then the baby suddenly grows into this gigantic monster and chases Angelica out of the house and down the road. So she tries to leave and drive away in her family's car, but then the baby catches her, picks up the car, and starts to eat it, which causes her to wake up from her nightmare screaming. Later on, Angelica's parents tell her that they're not going to be having the baby anymore, so it's assumed that it was a miscarriage or a false positive, and so she fakes being disappointed, but she's actually super happy inside. So I don't remember seeing this episode as a kid, but I was looking at the screenshots and that's terrifying. Why would you put that in a kid show? If you've seen that episode, comment down below. Next we have SpongeBob SquarePants, which I know all of you guys know. Even if you haven't seen the show, you know who SpongeBob is. There was an episode called The Nasty Patty. When a health inspector unexpectedly shows up at the Krusty Krab and demands one of everything on the menu, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs become incredibly suspicious of him because they hear this news report about a con artist that goes to restaurants pretending to be a health inspector just so they can eat all of the food for free. So in retaliation, they concoct a disgusting and nasty patty for the inspector containing all sorts of vile ingredients, and he ends up choking on a fly and passing out. But SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs crabs start panicking, thinking they actually killed this inspector with the nasty patty that they created. So for the rest of the episode, they try to dispose of the body in various ways, and when the health inspector starts to wake up as they bury him alive, they accidentally knock him out again because they don't realize that he's not actually dead. While they have his body, police officers come by and offer them a ride back to the Krabby Patty. So they put the body in the trunk, get driven there by the police, then SpongeBob tries to put him into the freezer, but then because the guy isn't dead, he like walks out of the freezer back into the restaurant, and the police beat the tar out of him because they think he's a zombie, and then they soon realize their mistake and they get like an A+ on their health review, which doesn't make any sense. They tried to kill him, but they still got a good mark on their restaurant. It was just such a weird episode. I remember seeing this as a kid, and I remember the gross Krabby Patty really freaking me out. It just looks like it's diseased or something. All right, next we have the Powerpuff Girls. There was an episode called Twisted Sister. In this episode, the girls start to feel overwhelmed by school and chores and constantly saving the day. So they decide to create a fourth Powerpuff Girl to help share the load, but instead of following the professor's original formula, the girls use artificial sweetener, dirt, and things like crayons and lizards and just like random things around the house to make this fourth Powerpuff Girl. And of course, they also use the secret ingredient, Chemical X. They succeed in creating a girl who they name Bunny, but she's gigantic, misshapen, and not very bright. But the girls still send her off to fight crime for them while they relax at home, so they let her do all of the dirty work. But unfortunately, Bunny mixes things up and she throws the police officers in jail while letting the criminals run free. So when her sisters arrive on the scene and see that she's messed everything up, they angrily tell Bunny that she's a bad girl and can't be a Powerpuff Girl anymore. So the heartbroken Bunny flies away to sob her heart out on a lonely cliffside, but then she returns when she hears the girls crying for help while they're fighting crime, so she saves the day. And after she defeats the bad guys, she's so happy because she finally became good. But unfortunately, this effort was too much for Bunny's unstable body, and she literally explodes, and a piece of her dress just sort of flutters to the ground. And the girls cry because they realize how horrible they were to her and they'll never ever see her again. So it was a pretty dark episode. Then there was an episode of Tom and Jerry, and this was called Blue Cat Blues. So Tom falls in love with a beautiful white cat, but although she returns his affections at first, she eventually leaves Tom for a rich neighborhood cat named Butch. So Jerry tells Tom to just move on with his life, but Tom just can't let go of his love and he tries to win her back. He showers her with expensive gifts, but Butch always one-ups him with an even more impressive display of wealth. So in a last-ditch effort to win her back, Tom literally sells himself into slavery to buy her a car, which promptly gets destroyed by Butch. So heartbroken and hopeless in debt, he drowns his sorrows and Jerry despairs of how to save his friend. And then Tom sees his former girlfriend and Butch drive by with a just married sign on the back of their car, so he decides to give up on life and sits in the middle of the train tracks. Jerry consoles himself that at least his girlfriend wouldn't do that to him, and just then Jerry sees his own girlfriend drive by with a different mouse and a just married sign. So realizing that life now holds nothing for him either, Jerry joins Tom on the track, and then the screen fades to black as a train approaches them. And that's a kid's show? Oh! So the first disturbing episode comes from a show called Ren and Stimpy, and this episode was called Jerry the Belly Button Elf. Yeah. Now, this episode came out in 1994, and I remember when I was a kid, this show was just so bizarre to me. I'm pretty sure my parents wouldn't even let me watch it because of like the episodes that would come out. They were just not okay for kids. I also think I just like completely avoided watching this show altogether because it did give me nightmares whenever I would like sneak watch it. You know when you used to sneak watch something? I could literally do a whole video on this show alone, so if you like me talking about this episode, I will literally do a whole video just dedicated to this show. Okay, so when this episode starts, Stimpy, this is the character Stimpy, he's shown just lying there playing with his belly button. And for some reason his belly button is making like amusing noises to him, like it's making like all these weird sort of sounds as he's touching it. So Ren, this is the character Ren, he tells Stimpy that if he keeps playing with his belly button, he's gonna go crazy, like he's gonna lose his mind. But he doesn't listen, season, and in this episode, he slowly starts to go a little bit insane. Like, he is shown pouring baking soda and vinegar into his belly button to watch it explode in front of him. He like sharpens pencils with his belly button. Stimpy becomes so obsessed with doing this and eventually starts to hear a voice coming from his belly button telling him to come inside. So he starts stretching his belly button and is actually able to like wrap it over himself to like physically go inside of his belly button, if that makes sense. I can't even show you all the pictures because this episode is so old. Like, all the pictures are like super pixelated, but like he literally like wanders into his belly button and all that's left on the ground is like this little coin-shaped belly button. Is this making any sense? So he begins to explore the inside of his belly button and meets Jerry the belly button elf, who puts Stimpy to work as his servant. But then Stimpy makes the lethal mistake of offering Jerry the belly button elf a piece of lint to eat. So then Jerry goes into a fit of rage and transforms into a giant pork chop monster named Adonis, Lord of Chaos, and then chases after poor Stimpy, who desperately is trying to crawl out of his own belly button. And then right before the episode ends, there's this character named Mimby. This is what Mimby looks like. And Mimby sees this little belly button sitting on the floor and picks it up and eats it. And the screen fades to black. And that's how it ends. If you ever hear noises or voices coming from your belly button, don't try and climb inside. Don't do it. Then the next disturbing episode comes from the show The Real Ghostbusters, and this episode is called The Boogeyman Cometh. And as I was doing research for this video and looking at the screenshots, wow, they really aired that, didn't they? Now, this episode came out in 1986, and people say it was the scariest Ghostbusters episode that ever aired, that literally ever came out. Like, I was reading so many articles online from people who are like adults, like in their 40s and 50s now, who watched this show as a kid and thought it was so disturbing. In this episode, the Ghostbusters have these two child clients. Their names are Megan and Kenny Carter. They're siblings, and they want to hire the Ghostbusters because something really scary is going on in their house. But when they find out how much the Ghostbusters charge, it literally says the fee is $1,500 for them to even like go to your house. And because they're just kids, they can't afford this. But when the kids mention that they have been seeing the boogeyman in their house, the Ghostbusters take this extreme interest and decided to take on this case for free. In Carter's bedroom, Egon picked up high paranormal activity in their closet, and at midnight, the boogeyman emerged from the closet, and it seemed like he was using portals to get into kids' bedrooms. So the Ghostbusters come up with this plan to lure the boogeyman into a trap. And after renting this like super expensive hotel room, they quickly like decorate it to make it look like it's a kid's room. And Ray was chosen as the bait because apparently he looks like the most childlike among the four. The boogeyman arrived, but he escaped the team again, and they blasted the portal to keep it open and pursued the boogeyman and chased him through different children's closets. And in the end, as you could probably guess, they do catch him, but people were just really creeped out by this episode because of the way the boogeyman was designed. Like, it's literally so bizarre, and I agree that it's sort of creepy. Especially like from the 80s, like back then, like maybe this is not scary to you now, but in the 80s? They didn't have stuff like this, you know? Okay, the next disturbing episode was from Dexter's Laboratory, and this was called Fillet of Soul. So this episode aired in 1997. I don't remember watching this episode, but I did like to watch this show with my sister as a kid. So at the beginning of the episode, Dexter and Dee Dee give their pet fish named Fishy too many commands, and as a result of them like bossing their fish around, he actually suffers from exhaustion and dies. Like, they literally kill their fish, which is so disturbing. They don't mean to, but like still. And then they both refuse to give their fish a proper burial, aka putting him down the toilet. So the fish comes back as a ghost and haunts them for not flushing him down the toilet. At night when they're trying to sleep, they see the ghost of the fish and decide to try to capture it. So they get this fishing rod with gummy worms hanging from the end of it, and then they tempt the fish to come closer, and then Dexter's able to capture it with his ghost hunting gear. And then thinking that their work is done, Dee Dee goes into the bathroom to brush her teeth, and suddenly a bunch of spirits of deceased pets from the sewer beyond capture her. So Dexter runs into the bathroom and sees his sister trying to be pulled into the toilet into this other fish like heaven world, or actually maybe it's the HE double hockey sticks. And basically these ghosts of pets say that they're not going to release her until Fishy gets a proper burial. So in the end, they finally flush the fish down the toilet, and Fishy then enters the sewer beyond with a smile on on his face. And then the episode ends in such a bizarre way, and so many people don't really understand it. But then their father walks into the bathroom and warns them that early in the morning, that's his special bathroom time. And then the next scene reveals that dad gains golden glowing eyes with slit pupils and sharp teeth, and he laughs maniacally. So people think that he's like the lord of the underworld where the fishes go to the afterlife. Yeah, if that makes sense. Anyway.